Welcome back to True Crime and Tea, where we are venturing into the heart of Mexico City today to discuss a case that completely shattered the public's perception of what monsters look like. We're going to be talking about Juana Barraza Sampaio, who gripped Mexico City with a spree of homicides that targeted the most vulnerable members of society, the elderly. For years, the police were looking for a man. They couldn't even conceive the idea that the person responsible for these ghastly deaths would actually be a woman, and in fact was a female professional wrestler who was known as the Lady of Silence. So without further ado, let's get into today's story. So Juana Barraza was a Mexican serial killer who was also a former professional wrestler who was also known as La Mataviejitas, or the Little Old Lady Killer. She was actually convicted of at least 11 homicides of elderly women in Mexico City between the late 1990s and 2006. Even though she was only convicted of 11, she is actually suspected of being responsible for up to 40 deaths. And in March 2008, she was sentenced to 759 years in prison for her crimes. I never understand the point of doing it longer than expected life. Who is going to be alive for 759 years? I kind of get it, because it's like if one gets thrown out, then you've got the other 100 and whatever years left. But it really seems like just give a life sentence. Do you know what I mean? But that's just my opinion. The method was extraordinarily chilling. It was consistent with the victims being strangled in their own homes using household items. So essentially they would rock up to the place and they're coming unprepared, but they use things like phone cords, clothing, or most notoriously they actually used a stethoscope. The killer didn't break in, they were invited in. So Joanna would pose as a government worker, a nurse, a social worker. She would gain access by offering welfare programs and or medical checkups. So she went in under the guise of someone that has gone to help these women, and that obviously they're not going to feel threatened by a nurse or a social worker. They would willingly invite her into their home. But once inside, she would overpower the victims, and it was easy for her to do this because she was a professional wrestler. She would have been able to, for one, they were elderly. So, elderly doesn't automatically mean frailty, but they were older women. And she would have had the added benefit of being someone who on a regular basis wrestles people to the ground. So because she was a professional wrestler, this kind of posed the manly strength that was used to be able to subdue her targets quickly. She usually targeted women who lived alone, and this gave her more opportunity to gain their trust. So during her trial, Barazza confessed to a few murders, attributing her actions to a deep-seated resentment towards her own alcoholic mother. She was raised by an alcoholic mother who had abused her, and she claimed that her mother sold her to a man for beer when she was a child. So she already had trauma from her upbringing. And we know of a lot of these stories, they are out of childhood trauma. So according to her, this trauma and her anger were reported to be what was projected onto the victims. This was her motivator for her actions. During the investigations for 2 years, the police struggled to uncover the identity of the killer. They made the assumption that the killer must have been a man, because the sheer brutality and the strength required to carry out these homicides, they just assumed that there's no way a woman can do this, it must be a man. And they were insistent on the fact that the murderer must have been a man, and this was because there were sightings that said that the person was dressed in woman's clothes, so they just assumed that this person could either have been someone who was wearing a disguise, or they were just a man. And they were blinded by what traditional narratives of criminal behavior looks like. They couldn't come to the understanding. The concept of this killer being a woman just was foreign to them. There was no way, that the assumption was there was no way this could have been a female serial killer of this nature, because of the sheer brutality, because of the so-called strength that was required to carry out these homicides. Just made the assumption that it had to be a man. The serial killings caused a widespread public outrage in Mexico City, and due to the rarity of female serial killers, police initially suspected that the murder was a man in women's clothing, which I've said already. What this meant was they were interviewing men that were known to dress up as women, and Barazza, who was not only known as but at this point, she would have been known as La Dama del Silencio, or the Lady of Silence. She was known to be an amateur Lucha Libre wrestler, and she eventually got arrested on the 25th of January 2006. And this was because she was seen to be fleeing the home of one of the victims, a lady called Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, after being spotted by one of the victims' lodgers. So the only reason she got caught was because there was a witness. Someone was there when Ana Maria was attacked, and that is what then led to Juana being arrested, and then the investigations continued. So while the city searched for La Mataviejitas, or the little old lady killer, Juana was living a public life in the ring. She was La Dama del Silencio, and in a world of Lucha Libre wrestling, she wore a pink and gold mask and performed as a ruda. She was a heel or a villain. So it's almost like she was a villain on the outside, but she also played the part inside the ring. There doesn't seem any disconnect between what was happening in real life and what was happening fictionally in the ring. When it came out that the little old lady killer was a woman, this revelation absolutely sent shockwaves through Mexico and Mexico City. The person they had hunted for years wasn't a man. And that was absolutely shocking to everyone, to find out that she was a mother and a wrestler. Yes, she had children. And when they arrested her, they found her to be in possession of social benefit papers and social worker identification cards, which she was using to gain entry into the victims' homes. And obviously she's done this by pretending to be a government employee who would be able to sign them up for programs and things like that. So they had found all of this kind of documentation on her. Inevitably, Juana was tried. She was tried in court, and then she was convicted of the homicides. She was convicted of 11 homicides and sentenced to 759 years in prison for her crimes. She is currently, at the point of recording this video and when I did the research, still incarcerated, and she remains to be one of the most notorious figures in Mexican criminal history. So when we consider an academic lens, there are some scholars out there that suggest we look at this through the lens of Mexicanidad and gender. Juana Barraza disrupted gender norms. From the get-go, we can see it was a disruption of gender norms, because the police themselves and the public perception was these crimes could not have been committed by anyone other than a man. She disrupted the traditional gender narratives of gender and victimhood. In Mexican culture, the concept of Mexicanidad is a masculine-centric notion. Women are traditionally viewed as nurturers, not predators. So Barazza, with her physical strength in her career, in the violent kind of spectacle of Lucha Libre, challenged the very boundaries of femininity, what it means to be a nurturing woman. And then you've got the intersection of spectacle and crime. The academic argument here is that the spectacle of Lucha Libre and the discourse of criminality intersected to the police parameters of gender, because Barazza didn't fit the stereotypical image of what they assumed the killer to look like, and she didn't fit the stereotypical image of a female serial killer either. She was able to remain invisible to the authorities for years, and her arrest revealed the limits on how Mexican society views both masculinity and femininity, and who counts as a victim. The public perception, it was completely warped through this case, through the fact that Barazza wasn't the stereotypical feminine woman that would be assumed to be part of Mexican culture. And then we've got cognitive dissonance in the public imagination. So the Mexican public and the police force experienced a mental conflict because they couldn't reconcile the image of a nurse or a social worker with that of a serial killer. They resolved this dissonance by assuming that the killer must have been a man in disguise. Public perception and police perception did not allow them to think there was any other alternative. And effectively, what this did was it allowed them to ignore the evidence that was right in front of their face. It allowed them to ignore this evidence because it didn't align with the societal norms and the societal schemas that have been created. This dissonance allowed them to have the information in front of them, but not link the two things together. And all of this demonstrates that when you do have certain assumptions about a community, when you do have certain assumptions about masculine and femininity and gender, sometimes this warps the perception's image and law enforcement's image of the actual criminal that is committing the crimes. And we could argue that had there not have been these assumptions, possibly that could have prevented some of these homicides. Would Ana Maria have been killed if they had gone with the evidence and had not only looked for men but had also investigated and looked at women as well? So Juana Barraza wasn't just a serial killer. She was a symptom of a society that didn't know how to look at women as anything other than mothers or victims, as nurturing over the villain, essentially. Her story as the Lady of Silence ended in a prison cell, but the questions that she raised about gender, strength, and the masks that some of us, all of us, wear, continue to be studied today. And that's it for today. Very quick one today. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of True Crime and Tea. If you enjoyed this semi-deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you know when another video is released. I know I've been extremely inconsistent, but I keep on losing my voice. I keep on getting ill and losing my voice. So I'm hoping that bout is over. It's been like on and off for 3 months. Over the last 3 months, I've probably had my voice for 2 weeks. It's crazy. I lost it October, just before the holiday break. It came back. Then we got into the new year. Was able to do a bit of recording in the new year. January, the first week of January. Literally, the week after, I lost my voice again. And my voice has just come back this week. And we are now in February. So, yeah. I have not had a voice. And obviously, I can't record if I don't have a voice. So there's been so much inconsistency. I'm hoping that now it's back. It's back. The weather's not great here in the UK, so I'm taking my vitamins. keep so hopefully I keep the voice staying, still a bit groggy, but hopefully it stays. But until next time, I will see you in my next video. Bye.